Yes. Hello and welcome to Startups in Real Life, where we are in week 4 of a 10-week, 2 times a week discussion with Rae Hames to talk about all things startup. If you have any insights, support, advice, we'd love to hear it. Please drop us a message and we'll connect. So let's get to it. Good day, Rae. How are you doing today?
Top of the morning. Good day. I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I can't believe it's Thursday already.
I know. As I shared with you, I'm flying solo with 2 small children this week and am thoroughly exhausted. So I'm quite excited for the weekend to come.
The circus.
Um, yeah, and you're putting together IKEA furniture, so
It's the
it's
weekend.
going to be quite a weekend, isn't it, Rae?
Yes.
Let's talk today about the shift. This is such an important topic, and I think both of us are kind of obsessed with it and have been for years. In how people want to work. I mentioned remote, hybrid, distributed. Tell me what you see because you've been so focused on it, and what you've been seeing for the last 5 years, and where you see it going. I just love to hear it from your perspective, somebody who's been
Yeah.
running a company around it for so long.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating because obviously we've all seen these shifts as observers and participants in some way, shape, or form. But I think that our experience in running a fully remote company for the past 5 years, both pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic, has given us just a really interesting view on how people are, like you said, how people prefer to work, and what type of people are, attracted to remote roles. And I think there's a lot of overlap with the freelance community, which, as you know, is like my huge passion, is helping people navigate work better as freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, I think that before the pandemic, in the before times, we saw, like, this is stating the obvious, but most people worked in an office. Like, most people were commuting. Certainly myself in the Bay Area, I was commuting to roles an hour and a half away from my house.
Yeah.
And that was totally normal. There was buses shipping people to and from tech campuses. And that was just the accepted norm. But what I saw in the agency space is that the most senior creative talent were opting to move out of town. I saw so many people leave the Bay Area. This is, again, before the pandemic, but head to Portland, head to Denver, head to Austin, before Austin was the new San Francisco, because they wanted more space. They wanted to be closer to family. There's a million reasons why, they left the city. But the biggest reason that they were empowered to work remote is because of their level of talent, right? Like, these are people who were executive creative directors, like high tier, creative folks that had some negotiating power, with the agencies that I was working with and in,
Mm-hmm.
and said, hey guys, I'll keep working, but I don't need to be here full time for this. And I saw a lot of agency leaders starting to make that more of their own norm. I definitely had a couple different managing directors that I worked under who worked flexible roles themselves, who came into the office 2 or 3 times a week. But that were kind of already leaning into that more flexible approach to enable both their own work-life balance, like, especially as people become parents, they start to have kids in school, like, that becomes more and more necessary. And when you're in a leadership position, you're able to create that flexibility for yourself. And so the pandemic opened that up to everybody, right? Like, that's the big unlock, is that when everybody was sent home from the office, people at all levels were like, wait a minute, being able to walk my kid to school is amazing. I don't need to be at the office for another 45 minutes because my office is in my kitchen, and this gives me a ton of flexibility with my mornings, to spend more time with my family, to get a quick run in, to run to the grocery store, like whatever those sundry tasks are, that all of a sudden didn't have to wait till after 6 p.m., and I think that what's been so interesting is seeing how much people, broadly speaking, have enjoyed that flexibility and what that, kind of remote hybrid work lifestyle has provided for them. And companies now trying to bring people back full time to the office, and seeing, like, what I'm seeing in trends and by the numbers is, like, pretty unsuccessfully, and I think that we're in a real, like, power to the people time. That's very exciting to witness, and hopefully, from my perspective, be able to facilitate.
Right. And do you see this ultimately good or bad for business?
I think that this is an interesting one because I think that remote work, and I'll say this till I'm blue in the face, like remote work is good for individuals, it's good for families, it's good for communities at large, because there's so much that each of us can be doing when we don't have to commute. If you're deleting an hour and a half of your day, whether you're driving or on a train or on a bus, and you can take a walk in the park, and then you do that every week, and you realize that there's litter, and you're like, I'm going to just pick this up because I'm here every week and I don't want to look at it. Little bit by bit, remote work gives us these opportunities to participate in our community, in a more full way. And I think that in a way that most people really want to engage with and just like have been too busy to participate in.
Mhm.
And so point one is like, I think that remote work is good for society. And I think that businesses, like one, the best businesses and certainly the best leaders within those businesses can see that and say, I want to be part of this net positive. But I think that the other piece here, that when it comes down to brass tacks, it's going to be really hard for companies to hire the best talent out there when they're in the driver's seat saying, I'm good. I have plenty of options to take a role that's remote or fully remote or a hybrid role. And I'm not going to drive my car into the city and pay $30 a day for parking and, you know what I mean? And fight traffic just to go to a job that I have other options now. I think that the marketplace, especially for, whether we're talking about fully remote full-time roles, whether we're talking about fractional roles, whether we're talking about freelance opportunities, like there's just the world's been cracked open and the best talent now doesn't have to choose full-time roles. And so from a business perspective, it makes sense to just get on board. Like, I think that's the thing that we're seeing now is like the best businesses are really optimizing their management techniques and management practices to allow for the most productive, remote or hybrid setup possible so that they can get results out of their team while being with the times.
Yeah. Are you watching the numbers of people converting more to freelance from employee? Is that, I know it definitely has been happening. Do we think it's going to get, even more so? Or do you think we're going to even out at some point?
It's interesting because I think that within the pandemic, we saw that being very talent led, right? People saying, what am I doing with my life? I'm going to start my own business,
Mhm.
And it was definitely very talent driven. I think that the shift to more freelance or contract based workforce right now is kind of being brand driven, right? Like we're seeing so many layoffs across big companies. The numbers are, especially on the West Coast, are really concentrated throughout the rest of the country. Hiring numbers are actually going up. But I think that within the tech sector, we can speak at least from this kind of SF perspective, is that companies are choosing to bring on talent in contract-based positions because it gives them flexibility, right? And like whether that's a good or bad situation, like jury's out because ultimately brands are protecting themselves in that instance. But what I do think that facilitates is giving contractors an opportunity to experience like, well, what does it feel like when you're working with a different type of relationship and set of expectations with this company? And does that change how you operate? And does it change, certainly as we talk about, more results focused work, if you're a contractor, you're there to do a job and you're not there necessarily to clock in, clock out like a traditional employee is. And so I think that there's some relationships there that right now, to answer your question, I think that the trends with freelance or contract-based work are being driven just as much by brand hiring practices as they are by talent preferences.
Mhm.
But I think that over time, it's going to help empower the talent audience at large to understand what it's like to work with a different relationship to your employer.
Right. I think that what you just touched on about how when you're working freelance, it's all result focused often. I mean, usually the best
Yeah.
written, statements of work or, of what you're going to do. I think that touches on, kind of the next topic that we're going to go into which is the most important traits for leaders today to lead teams that are hybrid, distributed, remote, fully, and how to manage,
Yeah.
in this change.
Well, I'm super interested. One, I'm going to turn the mic back on you after that question because I think that you've got a lot of experience managing fully remote teams, and I want to hear kind of your perspective on that as well. But I think that, yeah, because we just touched on it, most people who are brought in a freelance capacity are there to do a specific job and to provide a specific service that has a tangible outcome. And because that relationship is different, there's a different level of personal accountability. If I'm a freelancer and I show up, I log into Slack, I check in with my manager, but I don't actually do anything, I'm not going to get my contract renewed. I'm not going to get another job, in the future from this company. My job is to produce actual work. And so I think that level of personal accountability that comes inherently from, being in a freelance position is an exciting opportunity for brands to rethink how they think about team accountability and what the right talent mix is, to drive actual results. But I think that, the question about what do you think the most important traits are for, flexible work leaders, I think it's that. I think the point one is and again, this isn't rocket science, but working to outcomes, and having a real culture of achieving outcomes is a big one that needs to be something that's baked into an organization. And secondarily, I would say on a personal level for managers is having a strong sense of self-awareness, right? Of saying, if I find myself annoyed because someone on my team isn't on Slack at the same time that I am, why am I annoyed by that? Is that a me problem? If they're doing their job and they're, and work is running and we're hitting our deliverables and we're checking off our goals, I've got to check myself, right, in that moment. And I think that the more that managers can build that sense of self-awareness and, again, focus on the net positive that remote and flexible teams provide both to the company's bottom line as well as broader society, I think that there's a lot of big positives that can come from that, when you hold that close to your heart.
Right.
What do you think, though? What do you, I would love to, like I said, turn the mic back around. I would love to hear about your thoughts on leading flexible teams.
Yeah, I just tried to end yours with the right leaders because I think a lot of leaders that have succeeded in the past are not going to be the leaders that succeed in the future, and that it's going to be really a trust-based leader that knows. What I was talking about earlier with you was what the outcome is that you're looking for the year, for the quarter, for whatever period of time, and you as a leader have ensured that everyone is aligned to those to that, and then all of the sub areas underneath that. And to do that, you've got to have strong people around you, first of all. So are you hiring correctly? Are the people right next to you really aligned with you? And do they understand how what needs to be delivered is by their teams is aligned with the overall, objective of the company. And so, there is a lot of trust, a lot of clarity, really strong communication, relationship building managers. I think you touched on another piece that's very important to me, and that my mentor, Peggy Umancio, always taught me and my father around servant leadership and authentic leadership, which is, to know yourself in the Socratic sense, which is what you were just talking about. What is it about me that's triggering that, so that you understand it. And then the second piece that I talked about, which is, know yourself, and being able to see the world through the eyes of others. That's another piece of it that's around that relationship building, around that communication building. And in so doing those two things, you can bring a shared vision to life because you're bringing it as a group, and you're not just saying, I am going to be a martyr and I will drive hard, and you will all follow. That form of
I think that's over.
dead, and yet, I always thought is, quite oppressive. And so I'm so excited to see this next generation of leaders that is really working with the next generation of talent. right? I mean, that's like a whole nother topic that we haven't even gotten into,
I
and I've
mean,
raised one of them.
evolve or die.
Yeah,
This is
like,
Darwinism of the
right.
freelance workforce for sure.
Right. I mean, everyone's scratching their head over those 24-year-olds, 25-year-olds, and just coming out and demanding things. And it's just like, well, we never demanded anything. We just thanked them for what we were served, in my generation. And so, yours was different. And then now this one is even more demanding, of it's like, I want what I want, and I'm justified in wanting that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to kind of what we were talking about at the very top of this conversation, which is, talent has choice of the terms that they work under when they're bringing, the results to the table.
Yeah.
And I think that the more that work cultures optimize around the end goals, the end ideal outputs of projects that teams are working on, and talent can come to the table in a way that works for them to get those projects across the finish line, to hit those goals. It will matter less and less and less how and where and when it's done.
Right.
I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, the asynchronous thing, all of it. Okay, well, to wrap it up, we all said, we'd say, okay, how are we doing on Timera? How's the company doing?
Yeah.
And what's next?
Quick update. Well, we are working, as I mentioned in our Tuesday conversation, we are working on an interactive calculator that will help brands understand the saving potential that they can enjoy when they start to work with Elastic teams. I'm really excited because we've made a ton of progress on that this week. It's a project that's been moving really quickly internally, and I think that we'll have it available for folks to use early next week. So that has been a really quick turn project. I'm super proud of the team for how that's moved really quickly, and excited just to get it out in people's hands and start seeing how people use it. And then certainly, we're just marching on, actively working on our demo experience and prepping for the week ahead. It's Thursday, so I'm personally planning out next week.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you talk about brands and Elastic teams, you're coming at it from an agency perspective. And so I'll just take it back to just others, right? So it's any company, right, that is looking for deciding when they should bring someone in-house, into their company versus just keeping them by building out a team through an agency, through an ad agency, or through a creative agency, or through, and so, on the marketing side is kind of your example, I think, but, trying to make sure that they have some way of assessing when is it time, at what size, at what magnitude do we do that, right? Is that what
that's the goal.
building?
So, we'll talk when we have the calculator to share early next week. Maybe we can spend Tuesday's session. I can, for the listeners, explain what it's meant to produce. But at a high level, the goal is to help brands understand the cost savings of working with a flexible team themselves, managed through Timera's Elastic Team Toolkit, versus a more traditional agency approach. And there's pros and cons of both scenarios, right? And so I want to help. Brands genuinely figure out when it's the best, when is right to bring in either tool set or group of people. And so that's what that tool is going to be about.
That's great. Okay, I think we've went over today. So thank you so much for everything. And I will see you on Tuesday. Everybody have a good weekend. Bye.